Hello everybody, it's your friendly digital technology librarian, Christy here. We've reached another Friday, so of course I have another Film Rec Friday ready for everybody out there. So we are continuing our exploration of adventure stories this month, but this week I wanted to branch out a little bit, and rather than, focusing on what I think a lot of us focus on when we think of adventure, which is action-y stories, I wanted to sort of look at somewhat more insular adventure stories because there are plenty of them, and they are actually a lot of times some of my favorite adventure tales. So you don't have to have tons of fighting and explosions to have a phenomenal adventure tale, even though I know a lot of times in genre, when you're going through those browse categories, it does have adventure and action or action and adventure put together. But like I said, some of my favorite stories are really quite quiet. They're more about the journeying. And maybe it's a literal journey that these characters are taking, or more of a metaphorical one where they're just sort of figuring out who they are. Or maybe it's a combination of both. But in all honesty, those tend to be some of my absolute favorite versions of adventure tales. So, as always, the recommendations that we're going to share today are available to you entirely for free with the use of your Milan-Berlin library card. So without any further ado, let's get to the recs. Okay, my first of today's two recommendations is available via our Hoopla service, and that is 2000's miniseries, 10th Kingdom. I love a fractured fairy tale. Ever since I was a kid, it was one of my favorite kinds of stories. I was a huge fan of Grimm. I loved Once Upon a Time. And then 10th Kingdom was the predecessor to those. Like I mentioned, it aired in 2000. It was on network TV on NBC. I remember being super busy, but I still tuned in every night of the 5 nights it aired. And I just loved it. So with 10th Kingdom, we're dealing with two universes, really. There's like the regular contemporary world, and then there's this fairy tale land, 10th Kingdom. And in the 10th Kingdom, you have all of these different stories that all sort of intertwine together. You have Snow White, you have Sleeping Beauty. Of course, you have all the villains that take part in these stories as well. You have bits and pieces of folk tales, you have legends, and it's just so delightful. I distinctly remember, and this is 24 years ago. You have to recall, 24 years ago, I still thought it was fantastic. And of course, once I watched this, when I found out about shows like Once Upon a Time, when I found out about shows like Grimm airing on network television, I was just absolutely thrilled. But yeah, so in the 10th Kingdom, in the fairy tale land, we are of course dealing with an evil queen who has all of these schemes and plots that she's putting together in order to essentially rule over all of these different lands. And then in the regular world, we have a plucky, delightful heroine played by Kimberly Williams. And that's the other thing. The entire cast of this is so fantastic. Kimberly Williams is our heroine, Virginia Lewis. Her sort of layabout, lazy, scheming, but good-hearted father is played by John Larroquette. Scott Cohen, who I'm always surprised doesn't have a much larger career than he does, plays Wolf. That is his name. Wolf is, if you were a fan of Once Upon a Time, he's kind of the Hook of the 10th Kingdom. You know, that sort of swarthy, handsome love interest with dubious morals and certainly dubious behavior patterns. But he's fantastic in this. I don't really recall seeing him in too many other things, but this is fantastic. Then there's Diane Wiest, Cameron Manheim, Ed O'Neill from Married with Children plays a troll king. You've got Rutger Hauer, and Margaret Warwick Davis, like really quite big names on a regular sort of network television miniseries. And the other thing that I really enjoyed about this is, while there aren't a ton of special features or anything like, not special features, special effects, it's not like explosions or things like that going on every minute. The special effects that they do use are quite well done, at least for the time, again, 2000, and the station on which it aired. It's not like some big budget cable network show. It was just on NBC. So altogether, everything was really just, it just resulted in a great little mini series. that still feels pretty solid even today. Yes, some of the more computer graphics-y special effects are a little bit dated. It's 24 years from in the past, but they're serviceable. And I think the storyline itself is definitely one that works in a contemporary world today. So we're following originally Kimberly Williams' character, Virginia. She works really hard. She tries to make sure that everything in her home life is functioning well. Her father has a tendency to do a lot of get rich quick schemes, and so that causes a ton of monetary problems. And we don't know at first why, but the evil queen wants Virginia dead. We don't know anything about their connection. We don't know why this girl is a target, but she is. And because she is a target, she kind of ends up getting pulled into this fairy tale world, as does her father, where she ends up interacting with a ridiculous number of different stories, different actors and actresses. But really her sort of plucky go-get-'em attitude is what carries this entire series. I don't know if I would have liked it half as much had they cast somebody else. She's just so likable. And I think that she's always that way, no matter what kind of series or film she gets thrown into. You still enjoy her. You still root for her. And I think, there's something to be said for that kind of performer, that they have that ability to grab you so easily and so well. John Larroquette has always been one of those actors that I enjoy seeing on screen, whether we're talking about like old reruns of Night Court, his tiny roles in really big shows like West Wing or whatever. He's just always enjoyable. And Tony, despite the fact that Tony does some really shady stuff, you still like him. You still want him to be okay. And I think that's a hard line to be able to stay on. This kind of character could easily fall into that. I really dislike him. Why does she protect him? And why does she help her father so much? But you can see why. He clearly loves her. He clearly wants good things for her. He just keeps falling back into bad behaviors and bad patterns. So yeah, John Larroquette's character really, really aces. Scott Cohen as Wolf is, as I mentioned, very charming, handsome, sort of ridiculous behavior patterns. You can see still why Virginia really likes him, even begrudgingly. And he does do like big hero moments. There are a few, and it's interesting to see those kinds of characters and how this archetype, this sort of dubious past kind of guy, has become more and more prevalent as a love interest. We're no longer looking at Prince Charmings. We're looking at these guys who have flaws and who are definitely not like perfect on the surface, but once you dig a little deeper, they're far more interesting. And like I said, he is definitely similar to Hook in that way from Once Upon a Time, or any number of other sort of morally gray characters that we've seen over the years. Like if you're a Game of Thrones fan, obviously super different tone, but Game of Thrones is just like full of that kind of character. Gray, morally gray, but still appealing in their own way. And then, as mentioned, the like secondary characters, the cast is ridiculous. Rutger Hauer is one of those actors who can choose scenery like nobody else, but I will never forget the monologue at the end of Blade Runner. Like, that's just one of those things. I could recite it for you right now. Ed O'Neill, whether you know him from Married with Children, whether you know him from his newer shows, whether you know him from movies, he's again, a personality that you see on screen and you immediately have certain connotations with his performance. And he does a fantastic job as this over-the-top troll king. Warwick Davis is delightful always, whether you're a fan again of Willow or you first noticed him playing an Ewok in Return of the Jedi. It doesn't matter. Again, a super familiar face and a super familiar performer. And that secondary cast is just full of them. And I love that. It's not quite stunt casting, but there's something about it where every time it makes a film or a series like this almost interactive, because you're like, who is that? I know that person. And there's just this sort of universal enjoyment, I think, to that part of things as well. So, uh, Virginia is going on this quest, one, to find out why she's being targeted, and two, and she doesn't even realize this for most of the show, is she's trying to come to terms with a lot of traumas that happened to her. This is a mainstream network TV show, but some of the things that happened to her in her childhood, which we never get to see, we just hear about, it's all peripheral, are pretty dark, like seriously dark. Some of the stuff that happened to her, yeah, you definitely would be traumatized by those things. And this show does it in a lighthearted way, but she continually is sort of sifting through emotions that she had from those events and figuring out how to be a stronger, more rich human being, how she can, just continue to move forward and develop more. And I love that about this. It's this fun and frivolous story, obviously, with both with this lovely fantasy background, but it's also just a bit of a coming of age tale, that whole journey. It's both literal and figurative in this. She is becoming who she's meant to be. Plus, she's doing it while she's journeying across this fairy tale land. What more could you want? So if you are interested in fractured fairy tales, if you just are a big fan of any of the actors in this, if you happen to like well acted fantasy stories, or if you just like something light, delightful that you can watch with everybody in your family, make sure you check out The 10th Kingdom. It is really, really wonderful, and I'm so glad that I was able to find this and rewatch it after so many years. Okay, my other recommendation for this week is available via Hoopla, and this one is also both a literal and a metaphorical journey. This one is 1994's The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. I adore this movie. This film is just fantastic. In Priscilla, we are following the story of Anthony, who is a drag queen. He is taking two of his friends, Adam and Bernadette, across the vast Australian desert to get to a location where he's agreed to do this big cabaret act and drag show. And along the way, they come against a lot of issues, both interpersonally and externally, and it's just phenomenal. It is one of those stories that I watch every so many years because it's just such a good film. And along with extraordinarily well done acting, a great storyline, you also have this amazing soundtrack. This film is peppered with their drag show act performances, whether we're talking about like an impromptu drag performance in the middle of the desert, like literal middle of the desert. There's no stage, there's no nothing. There's just this big bonfire and them performing. Or we're talking more about like small venues, or we're talking about like big cabaret shows. The soundtrack for this is just wonderful, and the costuming is extraordinary. So Anthony is played by the phenomenal Hugo Weaving. Adam is played by Guy Pearce, and Bernadette is played by Terrence Stamp. These are three actors that are absolute A-game performers. You might know Hugo Weaving as one of the main agents in the Matrix series. I think that's where most of my friends who I introduced this film to are like, that's the Matrix guy. Guy Pearce has been in a ton of films. LA Confidential is probably the one that garnered him the most accolades. And Terrence Stamp is just like a classic character actor. He's been in so many films and so many stage performances. He's just amazing. And the three of them together have this extraordinarily solid chemistry. Anthony and Bernadette have been friends for years and years, and they've performed together for a long time. And Anthony and Adam are actually more like competitors. There's much more of an antagonistic relationship at the beginning between them. But due to several circumstances that I don't want to reveal, that he brings Adam along on this essentially drag tour. And it's wonderful because you see the three of them developing all of their own sort of relationship quirks, how their friendship grows, and how they all build history together. Because again, it is, the Australian desert is a big desert. And so there's nothing but them for a large portion of this film. It's only during those stops that we really see them interact with other people. So without a whole lot of chemistry, you don't have a movie, but thankfully these three have it. You do cover some pretty intense themes that I think are relevant, whether we're talking about the 1990s or we're talking about the 2020s. And the tone of this is so impressive to me because it is hilarious in some parts. It's quite tragic in others. And in other points, it just has this nice, warm, almost familial vibe to it. It just does such a good job of navigating the storyline. It really, really does. Whether or not we're talking about absolutely ludicrous things or we're just talking about, everyday interactions, this does it so well. This is definitely a very layered movie where you're gonna have like those moments of like outrageous comedy, but again, like I said, some pretty tragic topics. So don't go into it looking for just one or the other, because that would be a mistake. But if you are looking for something that's quite multifaceted, again with that fantastic score and incredibly phenomenal performances, make sure you check out The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. Again, it's available on Hoopla and it is an absolute must watch. Okay, so those are my 2 picks for today. If you happen to have any recommendations for adventuresome journeys, please recommend those titles below. If you have any recommendations for themes that we should cover in the near future, please definitely share those. Always looking for help with that. As always, thank you so much for joining me. I love putting these lists together, and today was just an absolute delight. Again, thank you so much for joining me, and hopefully I will see you next time. Bye.